Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry and this is my co-host.
I'm Chris Huddleston.
And today we are excited to continue our October theme of movies by discussing Vampire's Kiss.
How was your weekend?
It's all right, you know. It's nothing earth-shattering.
He was an ordinary guy.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Looking for an extraordinary love.
I'm Peter Lowe.
Rachel.
I brought this girl up to my place the other night.
It started with a kiss.
Really hot.
A very special kiss.
You wanted her very badly.
Yeah.
A kiss that could drive you mad.
I hate interrupted love affairs, don't you?
Yep.
It's affecting his work.
There you are! It's a horrible, horrible job. And you have to do it.
It's ruining his appetite.
My next appointment with you is Tuesday afternoon.
I'd like to make it sooner.
It's spoiling his sleep.
Sooner.
And don't think people haven't noticed.
Am I getting through to you? Over!
He is so eccentric.
My.
For Peter Lowe,
Oh, sooner.
that's just love
Love.
in the big city.
Don't laugh.
I'm a professional. I don't lie.
I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire!
Nicolas Cage,
The tortures of the damned!
Maria Conchita Alonso,
Shoot. Do it or I'll fire you. Do you understand? Not the floor, Alva.
and Jennifer Beals.
You are so pathetic.
Vampire's Kiss.
Strange stuff. I'll never do that again. Jeez.
Okay, one of the things I love about that trailer is it sets this up as a comedy, but I'm getting into it. So do you have a synopsis for us, Chris?
I do. In the 1988 film Vampire's Kiss, a publishing executive played by Nicolas Cage is bitten by a woman and then starts exhibiting erratic behavior. He pushes his secretary to extremes as he tries to come to terms with his delusions. The woman continues to visit, and as his madness deepens, it begins to look as if some of the events he's experiencing may be hallucinations.
All right, and you had never seen this, which I assumed you had, but
Yeah.
I guess interesting you came to this not having seen it. So we've heard the trailer, hilarious. Why don't we start with you? What were
Sure.
your impressions of it?
So, yeah, as you said, I had not. This is one that just for whatever reason I'd never seen. I was always aware of it, and it's something that probably should have been in my wheelhouse. But I don't know if it was from seeing the trailer probably before. But I always thought this was a comedy, and there are comedic elements to it, or things that are funny. I don't know if they're intentionally funny or not. It's an odd movie. Nicolas Cage's performance. So I'll start this by saying that I'm a big Nicolas Cage fan. I mean, even now, he's become kind of a joke or a punchline or whatever. But
Sure.
he's done some bad movies, but he's still doing some good stuff now. But I like Nicolas Cage a lot. His performance in this is strange. I don't know what the deal was with his accent. It's like a mixture of California surfer dude and kind of a British accent. I don't know exactly what that was supposed to be. You have Jennifer Beals is the woman that. So basically, he's this guy. He's a publishing executive, and it seems like he just goes. He works in the day, and then he goes out at night and brings women home from clubs. And he brings this woman home, Rachel, played by Jennifer Beals, and she bites him, or we think. I don't know. We'll have to get into all the, what's real and what isn't. And then he thinks he's a vampire after that. I was thinking about this. Jennifer Beals is an actress that I've not seen in a lot. Another movie that I've never seen before is Flashdance. And I think partly, we were little kids when that movie came out. So it was something, I was very aware of it because of the soundtrack and all that. But, she's gorgeous in this movie. And I mean, I don't know that she's really meant to be much more than that because she doesn't say a whole lot, throughout the course of the film. But it was just weird because it was not at all what I was expecting. Have you ever seen the Jim Carrey movie? It may have been the first movie that he did, Once Bitten. Have you ever seen that?
No,
I think
I
it's
have not.
him, and I forget who the actress is in it, but it's this kind of goofy comedy where it's sort of the same premise. He's bitten by a vampire, but it's this kind of slapstick comedy. And that's what I thought this was going to be, maybe a little less slapsticky, but I think this is more just about Nicolas Cage being insane pretty much. And his just kind of descent more and more into madness. I mean, there's a scene where Maria Conchita Alonso is his secretary, and he's just sort of harasses her all the time.
Cruel.
And at one point, he's very cruel to her. And at one point it's not 100% clear if he rapes her, but he tries to rape her. And, that's not something you think of as being, in a comedy film. So I don't know. I mean, it was interesting.
I would not have called this a comedy. And I hadn't seen the trailer before. So when we watched the trailer to download it to add here, I was like, what?
And the poster, when you look at the poster, it makes it look like, oh, this is zany comedy. And it's listed on IMDb as comedy horror. So I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed it. It just wasn't at all what I was expecting. So I was kind of like, okay, when does it get funny? We'll talk about that later. I mean, it does to a degree, but
there's stuff in it that causes a laugh, but there aren't jokes. And
no,
the jokes that there are, like you heard it in the trailer, I'm a professional, I don't laugh, right? This is the psychiatrist. Is one of the few kind of punchlines that exist in the movie, and they stand out because it's weird. But they're not played for a laugh. Nothing in the music, is comic. It's very
so he never grows
as a horror movie.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no. He never grows fangs or anything.
Right.
But he goes and buys plastic, vampire teeth like you would, buy when you were a kid, and he runs around with those, and there's a scene where he's running down the street saying, I'm a vampire. And that was funny. But again, I don't know if that was intentionally funny or if that was just, you know what I mean?
I think a lot of my delight in this film just comes from his performance that he has come to be known for.
He always brings it, and even I think directors, like really good directors, sometimes have to maybe dial him back a little bit but in this, he just totally brings it.
I haven't seen it in a long time, and I remember being delighted by this is insane. What struck me watching it this time is that it's quite slow.
Yeah, it's definitely slow.
And I was watching it at night, but I found myself a couple of times needing to pause it and get up and drink some water, and because I'm like, I don't want to fall asleep during this. I want to watch it from start to finish, which I know is a little bit of a damning commentary. I don't know that it's a snoozer, but it is slow.
I was resisting the urge at times, to grab my phone or whatever. There are times where it
and I don't remember that. But I wonder because right off the top, his performance is bonkers, and I'm not sure if this was his breakout movie or not, but it's certainly very early in his career. And I think it's worth watching just for that alone.
Yeah.
But I was trying to figure out as I watched it, different ways in which to watch this, because in one way it's just the portrait of a man going insane. I think it's a hard case to make that he's actually turning into a real vampire. He believes he is. Mm-hmm. But things like needing to go and buy the fake teeth, and and he very clearly devolves into a madman, sort of shuffling around the street, talking to himself. So we come out of his head enough to see that the de-evolution of his mind. So he starts as this sort of successful. It reminded me a little bit of American Psycho in some ways, where Christian Bale's character is this very high-functioning, wealthy, power player, but has these psychotic impulses. I mean, I suppose he's a psychopath, but we go back and forth between being inside his mind and outside his mind, and there is some question as to whether the murders he commits are even real. Mm-hmm. They're played as real, right? But at the end of the movie, you're like, how much of that really happened? And you have to there's little concrete things like Nicolas Cage, finally he does bite a woman in the neck. And there's a newspaper article that says, there was a woman that was murdered. And so you assume, we see a newspaper heading, that was real. But, all of his interactions with the vampire, the Beale character, we see her later in the bar, and she very convincingly, doesn't recognize, she's remembers meeting him one time.
She's like, you're Peter, right?
A couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's the vampire playing an act, but it doesn't seem that way in the film. It just seems like, whoa, what's, guy, take it easy, And as the vampire, she has notable fangs, and she's very controlling and manipulative of him, and he seems like in a trance-like state. And it's more, again, like in Joker, where his relationship, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker's relationship with his, neighbor, ends up being purely imagined, right? It's like a plot line through the thing, and then we realize at the end that it's all been in his head. So in one way, you're looking at an arc that is, he is sort of a successful, powerful guy who lives in New York. New York, I will also say New York is very much a character in this movie. We are just constantly cutting to sort of still shots of like landscape shots of New York.
Yeah.
To set mood. And that can be a cheap way to add production value to a movie, but I want to give the filmmaker the benefit of the doubt and say it's deliberate that he is setting this in New York, and that so we can think about life in New York, where there's many scenes where he's like causing a real ruckus in the street, and people are turning their heads and taking notice of him, but nobody's intervening. Nobody's rushing to help him, or he goes running down the street screaming, "I am a vampire! I am a vampire!" And people are just kind of like, only in New York.
Yeah, they're jaded, right?
And I think there's a way to look at it is that he's alone and he's really lonely. And what happens in New York is you can be wealthy and successful and look like you're kind of winning, but not have anybody. And then if you start to kind of go off the rails, his secretary has her brother and a family. She's, her parents, and she's got people. But this idea of a setting which is crowded full of people, but everybody is kind of fundamentally alone, even in a crowded club. Does that make any sense?
Sure, yeah.
There's no cops in this movie, right?
Yeah.
In movies like this, there's always a cop rushing in, or cops, in a crime scene. Then you cut to the detectives. It's always a factor. There's no law enforcement in this movie at all.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And people get hurt. right? I mean, there's assault. There, he kills somebody, and it's it's plausible that you think so. It's just the next day. Like by that point, there's no motive. There's no where do they start to look for this guy? They just haven't caught up with him yet. But the camera doesn't follow any of the what we think of as the societal consequences of his actions.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's interesting. I think it's not about a man within society. It really stays focused on this guy's mind that ends with a death wish. Not that at one point he puts his secretary's revolver in his mouth, and we've seen that she has it loaded with blanks, but he pulls the trigger twice, which I don't think it works that way. I don't think you could put a gun in your mouth, even if it's loaded with blanks, and shoot twice and not be seriously hurt by that.
Yeah,
but
I would think so too.
But in the film, he's not. And so we see that he's miserable and he wants to end it all. It's not a comedy.
No, for sure. Now, what you said, I mean, that all makes sense about the aloneness and all of that. I don't know that I would have come to that explanation on myself on my own, because they don't set that up particularly well. I don't think it doesn't really seem like he's mean to the secretary, but it doesn't necessarily seem like he's totally miserable in his work and he hates his life or anything like that. I didn't feel like,
No, and I don't. That's not what I'm getting at either. It's not that I'm not teasing out this thesis or that thesis. I'm just trying to make sense of because you watch this movie and you go, why did you make this movie? What are you showing me here?
Yeah, that's how I felt.
Because if it's a comedy, you're like, okay, trains, planes, and automobiles. It's a hilarious buddy, just sort of dark tinged buddy comedy or anti-buddy comedy about a guy just trying to get home for the holidays, and or Home Alone. It's what you see is what you get. And in this one, if you're selling it as a comedy, but it's clearly shot as a horror thing, but it's so slow that it's not scary, it makes me want to ask the filmmaker, what did you think you were making, right? And there's stuff going on. I think there's rich man, poor man. We see the secretary's life. We see that she lives far away and she has to ride the train, and that's sketchy and scary for her, whereas he's, lives in Midtown and he goes to this fancy shrink and she's got a fancy office. And so we see the haves and the have-nots. And I think that's one thing that's sort of played with in the movie. We have the people who are on top and the people who are on bottom. Mm-hmm. We see some sort of supporting shots of other crazies in New York. They're not cut from the frame. There are other nuts wandering around the streets here and there. So, we see people who are high functioning, and then we see people who are low functioning. And I think there's that dynamic going on. And then I think we see this relationship of healthy relationships and toxic relationships, right? We see the secretary, it has a tight-knit relationship with her parents and her brother in particular. It's protective, it's caring, right? And then we see the relationship with Nicolas Cage before he starts to go nuts, where he's basically just picking up women in bars and then not calling them again later. It's just
right.
Churn, and there's nothing meaningful there. And he's talking with his therapist about his relationships that's not working out for him, Excuse me. And so I think there's also a way of looking at this movie that's kind of so, and then also there's there's the vampire that is a parasite to him, and then and sort of abusing him, and then he is abusing his secretary, right? And there's this sort of implication that who are the people that do this to other people? Well, they are people who are having or have had that done to them. I don't know. I'm just kind of panning for gold here. I'm not trying to sell. I'm just trying to make sense of this movie because it's like there's enough in it that feels really deliberate, but none of it really came together in terms of like, what am I supposed to take from this at the end of it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I felt the same. And they, I like films that are ambiguous and unreliable, have unreliable narrators and all of that. But I don't know that they necessarily handled that too well either, because as the viewer, they don't give you too much indication, I don't think, as to know exactly what's real and what isn't. Like, for example, so with the vampire, he takes her home, he meets her in a bar, he takes her home, she bites him, and then he starts to, have these, I don't know if symptoms is the right word, but he's becoming a vampire, quote unquote. And then repeatedly she comes back, she'll just show up at his apartment and they're together again for the night. And, so how did you take that? Did he just meet her? Did he ever even go home with her?
I'm not sure.
Did they have a one night stand or?
I think so, but I don't think she bit him on the neck. I think she was giving him a hickey or something, because then we cut to a shot of him shaving with a straight razor, and he nicks himself in the neck where the night before she had quote unquote bitten him.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we see her bite him, but the next day he doesn't have a bite mark on his neck, or even a hickey for that matter. And he nicks himself shaving, and then he wears a bandage on his neck for the rest of the film, which is where ostensibly the fang marks are. And he takes it off later, and there are the fang marks. But they make a point. It's not incidental. They make a point of, like, the next shot after he's bitten is him shaving and nicking his neck and putting a Band-Aid on it. So I think he did have a one-night stand with her, and it's the night after there was a bat that got into his apartment, and he says to his therapist, I had this weird feeling of arousal while I was chasing the bat or trying to get the bat out, and it was part fear, but it was... And then she comes back to that the next week, and he's like, oh, I don't know. I don't remember what... I can't do his voice, but it's weird.
Yeah.
Where are the people? What are you doing? What's that choice?
Yeah, I didn't. That voice I didn't understand.
Very strange. I'll say again though, his performance is so strange. I'm glad in the trailer that we've got samples of it, because at one point he comes out of his office and he does both legs. He just jumps up onto this waist high thing and thrusts out his arm at the secretary. He's like, there you are! It's just the weirdest moment. And this film is full of that performance where he is not only taking it to 11, but making choices just like, what made you think to do that? Like, that's crazy. But, I mean, it's kind of core Nick Cage, really. I mean, it's...
On the trivia on IMDb, they said that the scene where he eats the cockroach, that was his idea, and he actually ate a cockroach. And they said there were people upset with him that he ate a real cockroach. And he said that, his response to that was, can anybody honestly say that they have never killed a roach before, that they didn't, use Raid or whatever? But yeah, so that was the thing that... What's weird about it is there's not much progression from, he seems like this fairly normal guy, who's just kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
To then all of a sudden he, he sees there's a bat in his apartment, and then he takes a woman home, and he apparently fantasizes that she's a vampire and bites him, and then he's just like crazy after that. There wasn't. I think they could have done more to show
Yeah.
a little bit that he has this empty, lonely life. Because you kind of watch it and you're sort of like, well, he takes this beautiful, the first woman, he takes her home. She's this beautiful girl, and she seemed kind of maybe somewhat interested in continuing to see him more. Well, because they go to
he stands her up a couple of times.
Yeah, he stands her up a couple of times because he's become obsessed with the vampire, but she seems genuinely interested in him. And then if he actually went home with the Rachel girl, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, this doesn't seem that terrible, But so I think they could have set up more of a progression of that he was just this lonely guy with this just, that does nothing but just go to bars and go home with women for one night stands, and he hates, or whatever. There just doesn't seem to be
a
much.
little more, unpacking of. Yeah, because there's a long stretch of the middle of the movie where he's sort of walking down the stairs, and then he has a sort of a weird Nicolas Cage mini seizure.
Yeah.
Where he puts a hand to his neck and he's like,
Right.
Like, people are like, are you okay? And then he's like, excuse me. And you're thinking, oh, he's becoming. But that takes a long time. Like, that is a long slope.
Yeah.
Down through eating the roach, and then he catches a pigeon and he takes it home and kills it. He eats it. Until he finally bites a woman in the neck in the club. And by that point, he's pretty much clearly full on bonkers.
Yeah. But that's the thing. I feel like it's, someone, would have to be very insane to think that you were bitten by a vampire and now you're becoming a vampire. And it's just kind of like he goes from this guy who seems to be, functioning well to just, you know what I mean? To have that kind of, I just didn't feel like they set up anything previously to be like he's having hallucinations at work or something. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, I don't really know what they were going for.
Yeah, me neither.
That said, I mean, it's not a bad movie. I mean, it has these, good actors in it. It's well acted and well put together. As you said,
Jessica
it's a little
Biel's
slow.
Performance as the vampire is really good too. I mean,
yeah, she's good.
She doesn't have a lot to do, but in terms of playing a role that is, she is the powerful one. She's the seductive one. He is her plaything. I think she nails that. I mean, she's beautiful, and she's got the blood red lipstick and the fangs, and it's it's a great 80s, contemporary 80s vision of what a vampire might be like. Because vampires, there's a whole range of how they manifest themselves on screen, from Nosferatu all the way up to True Blood, and and I thought this was an interesting kind of metropolitan nightclub take on the vampire.
But honestly, I mean, I think I would have rather seen, if it wasn't going to be a comedy, I think I would have rather seen had it be just a straight horror movie. She's actually a vampire. You could have had her in it more, and she actually turns him into a vampire.
Yeah. What does that look like? I mean, let's just talk about that. So let's say we cut out all the ambiguity. I think you have to have as a plot point that for a while he wonders if he's going insane, right? He's telling his shrink about it. He's candid with his shrink. instead of coy with her. And, of course, she assumes he's nuts because vampires aren't real. But he really is turning into a vamp. You know what I mean? And so that's got to be at least one part of it. But then it's got to become clear that he is becoming a vampire and resists it. I mean, how do you make a 90-minute movie that is really just about a man is bitten by a vampire and becomes a vampire? Stretch that over 90 minutes. Like, you have to have things happen. And actually, just to spin back to the movie we get, it's like, I think that's part of the problem. I think that's part of why it feels slow. Nothing really happens except that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that. Lonely man who's looking for love is bitten or believes he is bitten and believes he is turning into a vampire. And that's an hour and a half, and it just doesn't fill an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I looked, the director of the movie is named Robert Bierman, Bierman, and like, I looked through his filmography and there was barely anything that I was familiar with. It's a lot of TV stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he must be British, because like, one show was the Inspector Lynley Mysteries, which I assume is a British show. And the same thing with Jessica Biel's, or Jennifer Beals, I mean. I've not seen a lot of things that she was in, but she was on the, did you see the Swamp Thing TV show that from just last year?
No.
She's in that, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then she was also on, I think, kind of post Flashdance, or the big thing that she was known for was that Showtime show, The L Word. I think that was kind of the big thing.
I didn't watch that.
But another one that she was in that I've never seen, that I've always been interested in, is The Bride with Sting. Have you ever seen that?
No.
That's one maybe we should watch sometime. That came out in '85, and so it's about.
What is that, horror, comedy, drama? What?
No, it's horror. It's a Frankenstein movie, I think.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Sting is Dr. Frankenstein, and she's his wife, or the bride of Frankenstein. I don't know.
Well, we have to at least look at that a little closer. That sounds too good not to check out.
Yeah, it has a 5.4. Wow, it only has 2,800 ratings on IMDb. That's kind of interesting. But it has a 5.4. Yeah, it was one. Sting is, we're getting off track here, but Sting.
That's all right. I don't know how much more we have to talk about this movie. So
yeah, there's not. It's. I mean, I think, if you're a Nicolas Cage fan, I think it's worth watching too. And I was looking back through this. This was kind of just when he was really starting his ascent, because he had done Moonstruck and Peggy Sue Got Married.
Oh, he had already done Moonstruck.
Yeah, Moonstruck.
He's great in that.
Yeah. Moonstruck, Peggy Sue Got Married, and Raising Arizona. He'd done those. All three of those came out before.
I did not know that. All three of those are better than this.
Yeah, and it seems like an earlier movie than those, doesn't it?
Does.
Doesn't it seem like it should have been
really
like
does.
It came out, 5 years before or whatever. But Sting, we talked about him with the Dune movie, but Sting is one of those guys that it's kind of, I guess it's tough for musicians to, there's been a lot of musicians try to cross over into film, and it doesn't always work out. But Sting, was a guy that it's kind of interesting that I think that maybe he didn't do better with films because he seemed kind of a natural. I don't know.
The camera likes him. Yeah, I think it's just the police, and you have a lot to overcome if you're already big in one, entertainment field, and then.
I think that's that's broken down a lot since then. There was much more at that time. You were put in a box. Especially now, we have people go back and forth between TV and movies, and it's not. It used to be back then a TV actor. It was really tough for them to cross over into movies, or a film actor wouldn't do TV because that would be, like they were slumming it or whatever. Yeah, so.
Well, you have 8 Mile. You've got Eminem. I thought that was great. He was great in that. And Jamie Foxx has a musical career, but he's probably best known for his film and TV work. He's a comedian. He's just or Will Smith is another example.
Yeah, that's true.
But people kind of want to latch on to one thing you do. And laud that, and then everything else feels a little distracting because your brain has trouble unseeing the thing, the brand or whatever.
Yeah, sure. So what do you think about Vampire's Kiss as far as a recommendation? I mean, like I say, I liked it overall. I mean, it's an interesting film. I think more than anything, I mean, definitely don't go into it thinking it's a comedy. If you think it's going to be a comedy, you're going to be really disappointed. And
I think the fact that they pitch it as a comedy, though, is telling.
It's probably, they didn't know what to do with it, I would say, and for people that don't like I would say people that, and I don't know that this is the audience for this podcast, but people who are, maybe know Nicolas Cage best from the, I'm drawing a blank. What are the movies where he goes after the, like the Declaration of Independence?
National
and what
Treasure.
Are those called? Yeah, National Treasure. So people that are used to the subdued Nick Cage of that maybe would be turned off by this really out there Nick Cage in this one. But if for people who like the crazy Nick Cage, there's enough of that here to make it at least interesting.
I agree. I remember it more fondly than watching it this time. It's been several years, decades.
Was this one that
since
you
I
watched
saw
a lot as a kid?
I did not watch it a lot. I watched it once.
Oh, okay.
And thought, wow, look at him go,
Yeah.
But it's funny because I don't remember it being so slow. Like, I wouldn't have recommended it if I remembered it as a snoozer. I was really excited to rewatch this, and maybe it's just that the bonkerness of his performance is surprising and delightful the first time, and then it doesn't stand up to subsequent viewings, or maybe it's just been the most bonkers year in particular, in 4 years. If you expand it out, that bonkers just doesn't carry bonkers just is sort of exhausting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think that when I first saw it, I was just like, whoa, like you get to star in a movie and you're making these choices. This is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But so I would say if you're a fan, if you're a movie buff, if you're watching along with us, it's not a bad film. But if you're using the metric of how entertaining is it, like we're going to do a date night tonight and pop some popcorn and watch a movie, I guess I would not recommend this one. I think it's just slow and a little, at the end of it, a little unfulfilling. You're sort of like, so I guess, that's it? It's over? But you're tired. So you're kind of like, okay. So I guess I don't recommend it from that perspective. But, if you're like a single guy, like, I'm not whatever your status, I'm not a single guy, but if you're just a person who watches movies for the sake of like exploring interesting elements of it, it's definitely worth checking out if you hadn't seen it. If you're into Nick Cage, for sure, because that performance is nuts.
Yeah. And as somebody else in the role, you can't imagine really what it would be. A really dull movie probably without his performance. Now
And I think if as the character, like he's so big and over the top anyway, that when he starts to go crazy, it takes a while to tell.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
you're just sort of like, oh, does he seem crazier?
Now let me ask you something. So with the slowness of this, and this is something that, with going back and watching movies from 70s, 80s, there is a distinct difference between them and the movies that we get now. And for one thing, I think when you watch movies from this time, they're so much simpler than it seems like movies now are a lot more complex. It doesn't mean that they're smart, but they're just kind of more moving parts. I don't know, but how much do you feel watching something like this? It seems very slow just because maybe our brains have been kind of rewired to, we're so used to.
That's a good question.
Bite-sized things and, quick cuts and all of that.
That's a good question. I mean, it makes me think of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is incredibly slow, but that's not by accident. And it's every shot is so gorgeous and deliberate and specific that there is a physical part of your brain that's sitting, and it's 3 hours or something like that. But you sit and watch this thing, and you're sort of exhausted just because what you're doing is sitting on your duff, staring at a screen. But what you're staring at is gorgeous.
Everything's so compelling.
And at the time, I think this is another thing about 2001 that we forget is we hadn't been to the moon yet. We didn't have actual footage of what the Earth looked like from space yet. This was all Kubrick's imagination of what it looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's incredible. So if you were an audience that went to... Woody Allen has an interview somewhere that he was like, I went to see that. And it was so mind-blowing at first that I couldn't get my head around it. I'm like, what the heck is this? This is absurd and boring. And he said, but I went back and watched it again later, and and it sunk in on me the incredible masterwork that this, the triumph of imagination that this movie was.
Yeah.
But it's slow, and
I think that was most of Kubrick. I mean, The Shining is slow too.
Yeah. I'm okay with slow, but it requires more investment. You can't just sit down and shovel popcorn in your face. And Bruckheimer makes a movie that you sit down and you buckle in, and then you don't have to do anything, and it just whiplashes you around. Too Fast, Too Furious. I don't know that that's a Bruckheimer movie. I'm just saying, that's the. I just watched the new James Bond, not new, Casino Royale with spacing on the guy's name, blonde.
Yeah. Daniel Craig.
Yeah, Daniel Craig. Just because it came up in my queue and was like, you might like this. I'm like,
had you seen that one before?
Yeah, but I hadn't seen it in a while.
It's great.
Yeah, it's great. And, it's a James Bond movie, so it clips along at a pretty brisk pace. It's like, this is the scene where he seduces a beautiful woman. This is the scene where he plays cards. This is the scene where there's a shootout. This is the scene where he's almost poisoned. So it's designed to not be slow.
Yeah.
I think we have come to expect movies to kind of shuttle us along. And I think that part of that, though, is if you're going to write a screenplay, a successful that's going to get made, it needs to be clear what each scene is doing, right? And in a movie like this, where it's just like lots of shots of, we're establishing that it's morning in New York, so we're not going to do just one shot of the top of a lonely-looking skyscraper as the morning sun hits it. We're going to then cut to another shot of the sunlight hitting the park. And then we're going to cut to another, and there's 5 of those shots. And you start to feel like you're just stretching this movie, right? Like,
yeah.
There's no particular, like, we get it. We already understand we're in New York. We already understand that it's morning. Why are you still showing us this, right? And I think that one thing we probably have, you don't just get away in a movie with, like, isn't New York an interesting looking place? You don't get away with that anymore.
Yeah.
Go ahead, establish it's morning, establish we're in New York. What's happening, And I think of The French Connection, too, which is a great movie, but it's so slow until suddenly right at the end it's not.
Yeah.
And
slow is, I think we're both kind of saying slow is fine as long as it's interesting.
Yeah.
So, some of my favorite, 2001 is one of my favorites, and I got to see that on a big screen a couple of years ago. The same thing with The Shining. I got to see that in the theater a couple of years ago. That's another one of my favorites. So
right.
I don't have anything against slow movies.
But even Indiana Jones, right? Even the first one, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Or no, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. An action movie. I think nobody would dispute. Is it a comedy? It's funny, but it's an action movie. There's a lot of that movie that aren't action sequences.
Right.
Right? There's establishing him in the classroom. There's establishing him and his colleagues. There's him explaining to the government wonks the Ark of the Covenant. There's just a lot of... There's a shot of a map when he's flying showing, da-da-da-da, where is he going? Where's the red line? Going to next? So it's like... It's not the Transformers or a Michael Bay thing. It's a graphic novel, really, and but it gets there. You know what I mean? It's like, this is the scene where we're establishing this, and that's entertaining. Oh, the student in the front row has "love you" on her eyelids, like his students love him, and that flusters him, and you have a laugh, and that scene lands, and you enjoyed watching that scene. But it's not a pulse-pounding action sequence, right?
Right.
So it's not that... I don't know that we need... We just have lost... Well, I, as a viewer, have just lost some of my patience for fat in a movie. That's
right.
Just feels like padding. I'm like, I don't need... you could cut that. If this was... And now that we got Netflix and everything, it's like, if this was a 48-minute movie and you cut out all the stuffing... I would recommend it. I'd be like, you got to check out Vampire's Kiss. I don't know what it means, but it's crazy. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And you don't have to sit through twice as much of it to land the good stuff.
I think some of the what you're talking about, like with Indiana Jones, is I think newer action movies that aren't as well written or crafted, a lot of that character development is just replaced with, stuff blowing up or, things banging together or whatever. Whereas, especially Raiders, it was just so well written that they, you did. And again, I guess it's kind of unfair that we're talking about like Kubrick, one of the greatest directors, Spielberg, one of the greatest directors, but with even like a new slow film that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, The Lighthouse. That was a slow movie.
Yes.
But there's something interesting happening all the time. There's
never
never
ambiguity. There's ambiguity that is deliberate, and there's ambiguity that is just because the director... I was going to say lazy because I think there's a better bumper sticker, but it's more that just the director doesn't have... I've made movies where like we got to get it to 80 minutes, and you don't go back and rewrite fundamental, like compelling plot things. You find ways that you hope can be entertaining to kind of stuff in there, stuff it. And it's just not interesting to watch. But The Lighthouse was riveting. and didn't spoon feed you answers, but that felt like a masterful piece of directing to me. This had a lot of interesting stuff, but it doesn't feel like a masterful piece of directing. It feels kind of confusing because decisions weren't made, and a little bit maybe, I've got Nicolas Cage. He's so, so energized and so exciting. It's like he did that take where he jumped up on the thing and screamed, and then you're like, well, I don't really know what to tell him to do differently. So, okay, we're moving on,
Yeah, you get the feeling that the director...
Like, you're the director. Did he give you what you're trying to say in the scene? Oh, you don't know exactly what you're trying to say in the scene? Well, okay, there it is. That's the answer then.
Yeah, you get kind of the feeling that they just turned the camera on and were just like, hey, do your thing, instead of there being any real...
As
point
the director,
to it, I
you
guess.
can't just trust that if it's on the page, it's on the screen.
Right.
Right? I mean, that is literally your job, is taking what's on the page. And I think a lot of times you see movies where what's on the page is worse than what you see on the screen. You take a kind of a B script and somebody goes and directs the heck out of it, and it comes off as a much better movie with much more nuanced performances. The actors and the director and the cinematographer and the designers kind of fill in what isn't on the page to make it richer and a compelling story of human relationships. I don't think that I don't think that really happened in this movie. I don't think it was an award-winning story on the page. How could it have been? Because then the director really screwed it up if it was.
Yeah. Sure.
So I think it's just, they started with a script that had a lot of holes and wasn't really clear, and ended up with a movie that wasn't really clear.
Mm-hmm.
As entertaining as some of the performances in it are. And I like the style and the music, and this is what it was like to live in the 80s. All the club scenes, a lot of scenes where people dancing in clubs, and they're dancing like it's the 80s, and their hair is like it's the 80s, and their shoulder pads, and I get nostalgic for that stuff.
And it's I have the nostalgia too, and it's kind of fun to watch these movies from this era because we were teenagers at this time.
Right.
So it's, in a way, I feel a little bit like, yeah, I lived through this era, but I didn't really see that because I was, when this movie came out, I was 15 or 16 years old. So it wasn't like I was going out to nightclubs. You know what I mean? So you see that in these movies, but I don't really feel like I ever experienced that.
Yeah.
Going to an 80s nightclub,
There is one moment, like when he bites the blonde near the end of the movie. What really struck me after having lived in New York for 20 years is, so he's in the packed nightclub. He sort of shoves his way through the crowd. All that made sense. And the nightclub is clearly not to fire code with all those people in it. It all made sense. And he goes upstairs at one point, and he finds this sort of, other room in the club where you can still hear the music that is huge, and it's completely empty,
Mm-hmm.
Except for this one blonde who's probably sitting there. Nowadays, it'd be checking her phone, but she was probably doing coke.
Yeah.
And what struck me was this room is not packed.
Yeah.
There's people waiting outside. If there's room in the place, the whole thing is packed. You don't go into an internal space, public space like that at a nightclub in New York and find empty space. It really, I get it for the purpose of the scene. He needs to be alone with her, but I didn't think it's a little thing.
Yeah.
I heard him do an Actors Studio interview about eating the roach, and he said he did 2 takes. And they said, do you remember what it was like to eat the roach? And he says, I could still feel it in my mouth. But he didn't say it was his idea.
Oh, okay.
He made it sound like they wanted him to do it, and he thought, I can say no, or this can really, be... I remember him saying something to the effect of, this could make me, which is why I thought it would be an earlier movie for him. But if he did Raising Arizona and those other movies...
Yeah.
Moonlighting first.
He was getting a lot of acclaim,
Yeah. you're made, man. Moonlighting would have made you.
Oh yeah.
And the eating the roach thing is, in my memory, it was a much more jarring scene than watching it the second time.
Yeah.
You know?
One quick thing about the nightclub scene or nightclub scenes that reminded me a lot of. Have you ever seen Fright Night?
No.
Oh, we should watch Fright Night.
Is it give me the one, like, what is it? Ghosts, demon?
No, it's
witch?
it's a vampire. So it's Roddy McDowall is this horror, like old school, like horror TV host where he shows like bad horror movies.
Uh-huh.
And there's a kid who this guy moves in next door to him and he thinks he's a vampire. And and it's like he's trying to convince everybody. No one will listen to him that the next door neighbor is a vampire, and he gets Roddy McDowall. He thinks because he's this horror TV host, he like recruits him to help him fight the vampire. It's a movie. It's not scary. It is a comedy horror. We should watch that. We
could watch that.
I would like to talk to you about that because it's a favorite of mine.
You had proposed Halloween 3, the Season of the Witch, for next week.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked this one, and I feel like it's your turn to pick. We can watch that if you want. I'm willing to do it. I'm not excited about it because I was traumatized by it when I saw it in like junior high with that scene where the kid's head turns into bugs. Like, really upset me. I'm sure if I watched it now, it would actually sort of cleanse that and be like, oh,
nah, it's still pretty
I was
gross.
just a kid.
It's still pretty gross.
But it like really upset me that his parents were sitting there, and that it was really upsetting to me. I know the rest of the movie is campy and bonkers, and there's robots and weird guys in suits, and it's just completely out of the franchise, and so I'm willing to do it because I think it fits right into our thing.
Let's watch Fright Night. I think you would enjoy Fright Night. I'd be surprised, and it's a perfect Halloween movie, basically.
So for next week we're gonna watch Fright Night.
Is that okay with you?
I have never seen it. No, I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, if you've never seen it,
sounds great.
I mean, it's
Roddy McDowall.
Yeah.
I see it. I mean, I've certainly heard of Fright Night, which is something in its favor.
Roddy McDowall and Chris Sarandon. You know who Chris Sarandon is?
No.
You'll know him when he's in The Princess Bride.
Okay.
You'll know him when you see him. I mean, he's been in a ton of stuff. That'll be fun. I'd like to, because it's a movie that I've seen a bunch of times. So, I know it really well, but it'll be fun to discuss it with you having not seen it.
Excellent. So that's a done deal. We are
Cool.
going to watch Fright Night for next week. Shall we wrap it up for this session?
Sure.
All right. So, I mean, I think to summarize and correct me if I'm wrong, is like we recommend it if you're into Nicolas Cage and if you're okay with it being a little slow and confusing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking for something really fun and a date night movie, this might not be the one.
Yeah.
You know what? Go watch Moonlighting. It's great. Okay. Why don't we all tune in and